It was a summer evening in Baltimore, Maryland, when 16-year-old Keisha Moore disappeared. A vibrant and promising high school student, Keisha was last seen walking down a familiar street in her neighborhood, her steps echoing on the cracked sidewalks of a community that once felt safe. Her absence sent shockwaves through the city, igniting an immediate wave of fear and outrage. Keisha had been more than just another face in the crowd. She was a daughter, a sister, and a friend with aspirations to go to college and escape the challenges of her environment. To her family, she was the light that brightened their world. To her friends, she was a constant source of laughter and support. But on that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Keisha vanished, leaving behind only questions and the cold fear of the unknown. In the days that followed, the streets filled with protests. Signs demanding justice for Keisha Moore were raised high, and chants echoed through the city, calling for answers. But despite the community's efforts, no one could explain what had happened to her. The police, though diligent, were quickly overwhelmed by the lack of leads. The city streets, once a place of familiarity, now felt like a battleground. One fought not only for the truth, but for the very safety of the people. Amidst this chaos, a young journalist named Alex Harris, working at a local news outlet, decided to take matters into her own hands. She wasn't content to stand by as rumors swirled and hopes of finding Keisha began to fade. Alex's instincts told her that there was more to this story than met the eye. She began to dig deeper, following trails that others had ignored. What Alex would uncover would set her on a dangerous path, a path where the fight for justice would come at a high cost. As the search for Keisha intensified, Alex discovered a chilling connection between her disappearance and a powerful figure in the city's political scene, a local politician, Mayor Thomas Caldwell, who had ties to a far darker world than anyone could have imagined. The deeper Alex dug, the more she realized that Keisha's case was not just another missing persons tragedy. It was the key to uncovering a vast conspiracy that reached far beyond the city's borders, a conspiracy that would put everyone involved in jeopardy. Keisha's disappearance was no longer just a local mystery. It was the beginning of a battle between truth and power, a battle that would unravel the dark underbelly of Baltimore's political elite and thrust Alex into a dangerous game of cat and mouse. The closer Alex got to the truth, the more her own life would be at risk, as powerful figures sought to silence her, just as they had silenced so many before. Before Keisha Moore became the face of a mystery that gripped Baltimore, she was a teenager like so many others, full of dreams, promise, and potential. Born and raised in a modest but loving home in the heart of the city, Keisha's life had always been marked by a strong sense of family and community. Her mother, a nurse at the local clinic, and her father, a mechanic who had worked tirelessly to provide for his family, instilled in Keisha the values of hard work, compassion, and ambition. Keisha's world was centered around her education. She had always been a bright student, excelling in her classes and nurturing aspirations of becoming a doctor. She dreamed of one day leaving Baltimore behind, going to college, and returning to help her community. Keisha's determination was evident to everyone who knew her. She was not just another teenager lost in the chaos of city life. She was a young woman with a clear purpose, her eyes always fixed on the future. Her close-knit circle of friends described her as the glue that held them together. Whether it was helping her classmates with homework or organizing weekend meetups, Keisha was always the first to lend a hand, her infectious laughter filling any room she entered. To her family, she was the eldest child, setting a strong example for her younger siblings. She cared deeply for them, often stepping into a maternal role when their parents were busy with work. The love Keisha shared with her family was palpable, a bond unbroken by the everyday struggles they faced. But it wasn't just her family and friends who noticed Keisha's potential. The local community saw her as a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the toughest of neighborhoods, there were young people with a drive to break free from the cycle of hardship. In a city where crime and poverty often overshadowed the light of ambition, Keisha shone as a beacon of possibility. Her disappearance, when it came, shattered that hope. It was more than just the loss of a daughter or friend. It was the loss of a future. As the community grappled with the sudden and inexplicable absence of one of their own, a sense of fear took hold, rippling through the very fabric of the neighborhood that had once felt safe. At Beyond the Evidence, we're committed to bringing you the truth, no matter how dangerous the journey may be. We'll dig deeper into Keisha's case and the secrets that powerful figures are desperate to keep hidden. If you want to follow this investigation and uncover the full story, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Don't miss any updates as we piece together the evidence and reveal the truth behind Keisha Moore's disappearance. The fight for justice has only just begun. Keisha Moore's disappearance cast a shadow over more than just her neighborhood. It tore through the fabric of her closest relationships. Her family, especially her mother and father, were the first to be affected. Her mother, a woman who had spent years nurturing and protecting her children, was shattered by the void left in her home. Each morning, she would walk through the empty halls of their small house, haunted by the absence of her eldest daughter. The family's pain was not just the grief of missing Keisha, but the fear that she was out there, somewhere, and that they could not protect her. Keisha's father, a quiet man who rarely showed his emotions, was equally undone. He had worked long hours to provide for his family, but nothing could prepare him for the torment of not knowing where his daughter was or what had happened to her. It was not just the loss of Keisha, it was the sense of helplessness that took root in his heart, a father's worst nightmare. The feeling that he had failed to keep his family safe. Her younger siblings, too, struggled to comprehend the reality of her absence. Keisha had always been their protector, their role model, and their confidant. The gaping hole she left behind was not just emotional. It was a constant reminder of the dangers that lurked beyond the safety of their home. They had always admired her strength, but now they were left to navigate a world without her steady presence. Within the broader community, Keisha was regarded as a symbol of hope. Her friends, many of whom had grown up with her, now faced the heart-wrenching reality that the future they had once imagined with her in it was slipping away. The community rallied around Keisha's family, but there was a growing sense of unease. People whispered of things they had seen, heard, and suspected, but no one dared speak up openly. Trust was a fragile thing in this neighborhood, where power dynamics ran deep and everyone had something to lose. Amidst the grief and the community's outcry for justice, there was one person who began to take a different kind of interest in the case. Alex Harris, a young journalist for the local news, had watched the unfolding protests with growing concern. Initially, like everyone else, she was caught up in the outrage. But as the weeks passed and Keisha's case remained unsolved, something in Alex stirred. A deep sense that there was more to this story than anyone was willing to admit. Her instincts, honed by years of investigative work, told her that the truth lay somewhere in the hidden corners of Baltimore, where power and corruption played a much larger role than the public would ever know. As Alex began to dig deeper, she quickly realized that the people who knew Keisha best, the ones closest to her, were also the ones most likely to be hiding secrets. Keisha's best friend, for example, had grown unusually quiet, avoiding contact with the press and family. And then there were the whispers about Keisha's recent interactions with some of the city's most powerful figures. Could there have been something more going on beneath the surface? With each passing day, the dynamics of Keisha's relationships became more complex, layered with secrets and hidden truths. For Alex, the story of Keisha's disappearance was not just about finding a missing girl. It was about uncovering the connections that tied Keisha to a world much darker than anyone could have imagined. As Alex's investigation unfolded, she found herself walking a tightrope between the truth and the dangerous forces that sought to protect it. As the weeks passed without any progress in Keisha Moore's case, the city's frustration grew. Protests continued, but answers remained elusive. It was during one of these protests that Alex Harris, the young journalist, began to notice something unsettling. While the community's anger was palpable, there was an undercurrent of fear, whispers that seemed to fade as soon as they were spoken. People weren't just afraid for Keisha's safety. They were afraid of something much larger lurking in the shadows. One evening, as Alex reviewed news coverage and interview tapes, she noticed a pattern emerging from the small but telling details. Several sources, including a few anonymous tips, mentioned that Keisha had recently been seen in the company of a local politician, Mayor Thomas Caldwell. At first, it seemed like a passing mention, but Alex's instincts told her there was more to it. Caldwell had long been a figure of influence in Baltimore, known for his political savvy and his generous contributions to local charities. But his political dealings were not always transparent, and Alex had heard rumors of under-the-table agreements and shady alliances. The more she dug into Caldwell's past, the more troubling connections began to surface. Alex discovered that Caldwell had been linked to a number of controversies over the years, deals that appeared too good to be true, and businesses that seemed to operate in a legal gray area. While there was never any concrete evidence of wrongdoing, the whispers about Caldwell's involvement in human trafficking began to resurface. The idea seemed far-fetched at first, but the connections were too frequent to ignore. As Alex continued to investigate, she uncovered an even more chilling detail. A local business, under Caldwell's protection, had recently come under scrutiny for operating in a way that suggested trafficking activity. though no one had been able to prove it. Keisha's name had been mentioned in relation to this business, but the details were murky, and no one had dared to speak out. Was it possible that Keisha had become entangled in something much darker than anyone had realized? Had she been coerced, or worse, involved in something she hadn't fully understood? The early warning signs were now impossible to overlook. Alex could no longer chalk this up to coincidence. There was a trail, one that led directly to powerful figures in the city who had everything to lose if the truth came out. With each new discovery, Alex felt the weight of what she was uncovering. She was no longer simply investigating a missing persons case. She was digging into a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of Baltimore's political and criminal networks. And the deeper she went, the more dangerous her quest for the truth became. But it wasn't just the fear of what she might uncover that weighed on Alex. It was the growing realization that she was up against forces that would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. As her investigation began to gain traction, Alex started receiving subtle warnings, obstacles placed in her path, calls from untraceable numbers, and strange encounters that made her feel as though someone was always watching. The closer she got to the truth, the more isolated she became. Was this the price of uncovering the truth, or had she simply stumbled into something she couldn't escape? As Alex Harris pushed further into the dark web of corruption and human trafficking in Baltimore, the risks became undeniable. The sources she had once relied on for information grew more hesitant. Their voices, once clear and firm, now trembled with fear. In hushed tones, they warned her to back off. Something had changed, and the deeper Alex went, the more dangerous her investigation became. The community's protests over Keisha Moore's disappearance had turned from passionate demands for justice to an angry, almost desperate cry for any sign of hope. But as the days stretched into weeks, the public's resolve began to falter. People were starting to whisper about the growing silence from law enforcement and city officials. Some even claimed that the authorities weren't looking hard enough, or worse, were actively hindering the investigation. The overwhelming fear that had started as a distant hum in the community was now a constant presence. Then came the first threat. It was subtle, an email left unanswered, a warning sign in the form of a strange phone call. But as Alex continued to dig, the warnings became more pointed. Her editor, a long-time veteran of the newsroom, sat her down one afternoon. He spoke in quiet tones, urging her to stop. "This isn't just a story anymore," he said, his voice heavy with concern. "There are forces at play here that you don't understand. You need to stop before it's too late." But for Alex, stopping wasn't an option. She had come too far. Her gut told her that Keisha's disappearance was more than just a local tragedy. It was connected to something much larger, and the truth had to come out. As Alex dug deeper into the network around Mayor Thomas Caldwell, the pieces of the puzzle began to align in ways that made her stomach turn. Caldwell's ties to the city's elite businessmen, his shady dealings with foreign investors, and his political influence were all starting to form a clearer picture. But there was one detail that Alex could no longer ignore: the trafficking ring. The same one that had been rumored for years, the one Caldwell was suspected to be protecting, had been operating in plain sight, hidden in the underbelly of Baltimore's wealthiest neighborhoods. A local warehouse, which had been quietly identified as a front for illegal activities, was linked to Caldwell's inner circle. Alex's sources pointed to it, telling her it was the hub of the trafficking operation. But as she followed the trail, it quickly became clear that Keisha's disappearance wasn't just about being in the wrong place at the wrong time. It was far more sinister. The warehouse had been a place where vulnerable young people, just like Keisha, had been trafficked, often lured by false promises of a better life. The investigation was now spiraling out of control. Alex was uncovering a network that not only included powerful political figures, but also wealthy businessmen with global ties. She had followed the thread of corruption from the mayor's office to a network of foreign investors with questionable motives. Keisha had unknowingly become entangled in their world, a world where money, power, and human lives were commodities to be traded. The stakes grew higher when Alex's investigation began to draw attention. The first sign of escalation was the sudden death of one of her key sources. The man had been found in his apartment, an apparent suicide, but the signs didn't add up. His death was too convenient, too timed with Alex's breakthrough. The local police seemed reluctant to investigate, their indifference more than suspicious. For Alex, the threat was no longer just about career or reputation. It was about her life. She was now a marked woman, standing on the precipice of exposing a powerful and dangerous network. The closer she came to the truth, the more enemies she made. But she knew that the fight was no longer about her. It was about Keisha and every other victim who had fallen into the hands of the people who thought they could operate with impunity. The tension in the city continued to mount. The protests against Mayor Caldwell grew louder, but so did the threats against Alex. In the wake of the escalating violence, the journalist knew she was running out of time. The people who controlled the strings of power in Baltimore had everything to lose, and they would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. The death of Alex Harris's key source marked a chilling turning point in her investigation. His body was discovered in his apartment under suspicious circumstances, a suicide, according to the police report. But the signs were all wrong. The timing was too perfect, the details too convenient. For Alex, it was a clear message: back off or face the consequences. But she knew she could not stop now, not after coming so far. Not when the truth was so close to being exposed. The news of the source's death rippled through the city, deepening the sense of fear and distrust. Keisha's case had already torn the community apart, but now, with this new layer of danger, the situation grew even more volatile. The protests against Mayor Thomas Caldwell, already intense, began to take a darker tone. People no longer just wanted answers, they were demanding action. The atmosphere in Baltimore had shifted from one of righteous anger to something more desperate, more volatile. It felt as though the city was on the brink of an explosive tipping point. Alex felt the pressure mounting from all sides. Her editor, once supportive of her investigation, grew increasingly concerned. The newsroom, which had once been a place of collaboration and journalistic integrity now felt like a battleground. The higher-ups began questioning the safety of continuing the story. Would the risk be worth it? Would Alex's pursuit of the truth put not only her life at risk, but the lives of those around her? The feeling of isolation grew as even her closest colleagues started to distance themselves from the case. Fear was creeping into every corner of the investigation, and Alex was left alone to carry the weight of what she had uncovered. The community's reaction was equally divided. While many continued to rally behind the search for justice, others began to whisper about the dangers of challenging the powerful forces controlling the city. People who had once been vocal about the need for change now hesitated to speak out. Fear of retaliation kept them silent. The fear was palpable, a quiet dread that stifled any remaining hope that the city's broken system could be fixed. For Keisha's family, the aftermath of the source's death was a cruel reminder of the stakes. Her mother, already devastated by her daughter's disappearance, was now faced with the realization that the search for justice had become a perilous journey. Her husband, once a pillar of strength, was beginning to show cracks in his resolve. The loss of their daughter, compounded by the growing danger surrounding the investigation, felt unbearable. They had hoped for answers, but now, as the investigation took a darker turn, they feared that the truth might come at a far greater cost. As Alex continued to push forward, the personal toll of the investigation became clearer. The weight of each discovery, each new piece of information, was slowly eating away at her. The threats were no longer just veiled warnings. They were becoming more direct. Her phone rang with untraceable numbers, and shadowy figures seemed to follow her at all hours. Alex knew she was being watched, but she couldn't stop. Not when she was so close to exposing the truth. She could feel the walls closing in on her, but her determination to find Keisha and to reveal the corruption that had silenced her only grew stronger. The public's outrage reached a fever pitch, and with it, the risks for everyone involved. The tension in Baltimore, already high, was now at a breaking point. The city seemed to be on the verge of chaos, with no one knowing who would act first, the protesters or the forces protecting the guilty. In the streets, the chants grew louder, demanding justice not just for Keisha, but for the countless others who had been lost in the shadows of power and corruption. The question now was no longer if Keisha's case would be solved, but who would survive long enough to see it through. The final pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place as Alex Harris delved deeper into the corruption she had uncovered. The web of deceit and power that had shielded Mayor Thomas Caldwell and his accomplices began to reveal its dark, ugly truth. Each step forward seemed to lead her into even darker corners, where secrets were hidden in plain sight, and the stakes grew ever higher. It wasn't just a political scandal anymore. What Alex had stumbled upon was a sophisticated, far-reaching human trafficking network that stretched beyond the borders of Baltimore, reaching international shores. The warehouse she had identified earlier, now confirmed to be the heart of the operation, was only the beginning. Alex's investigation showed that the trafficking ring, which had been in operation for years, involved multiple layers of corruption, from local law enforcement to global financiers. The young women being trafficked, including Keisha, were not just victims, they were commodities, bought and sold with the full knowledge of some of the city's most powerful figures. Alex's relentless pursuit of the truth led her to uncover irrefutable evidence, contracts, financial records, and testimonies that tied Caldwell to key players in the international trafficking operation. The mayor, once considered a champion of the city, was now revealed to be a central figure in the trafficking network, using his political influence to shield the criminals and their operations from justice. As the full scope of the conspiracy became clear, it was evident that Keisha's disappearance had been a deliberate act, an attempt to silence a young woman who had unknowingly stumbled upon a web of exploitation. But with this revelation came grave consequences. The dangers that had been stalking Alex from the shadows now materialized into a real, tangible threat. As the public learned of her findings, the backlash was swift and brutal. Caldwell's supporters, many of whom held high positions of power, rallied to protect their own interests. Alex's life was now in grave danger. Her name, once trusted by the community, was now smeared by those desperate to preserve the status quo. The mayor's allies began to discredit her work, painting her as a reckless journalist who had gone too far. Despite the mounting pressure, Alex refused to back down. The truth had been exposed, and there was no turning back now. She became a symbol of resistance, a lone voice against a system that had been built on lies and exploitation. But as the investigation grew more public, the personal toll became undeniable. Alex's safety was compromised. Her apartment was broken into, her personal information leaked, and her every move watched. The threats escalated, but so did her determination. She knew the risks. She knew that exposing the full extent of the conspiracy could mean her life, but the price of silence was too great. As Alex's fight for justice continued, the impact of her revelations rippled through the city. The protests against Caldwell gained momentum, but the mayor and his allies fought back with equal fervor, using their wealth and influence to turn public opinion. Despite the public outcry, the powerful figures behind the trafficking operation tried to bury the truth, attempting to convince the public that Alex's reporting was fabricated, that her evidence was insufficient, and that she had been manipulated by forces beyond her control. The community's reaction was mixed. For many, Alex's investigation was a beacon of hope in a city that had long been crippled by corruption. Her work was seen as an act of bravery, an effort to bring justice to a broken system. But there were others who feared what the revelations would mean for their own safety and well-being. Fear of retaliation from the powerful figures Alex had exposed kept many people in the shadows. They wanted justice, but they were too afraid to speak out. The consequences of the investigation were felt most deeply by Keisha's family. While they were grateful for Alex's unwavering commitment to uncovering the truth, they too had to confront the reality of the situation. Keisha's mother, once hopeful that her daughter might return home, was now forced to reckon with the possibility that Keisha had become one of many victims in a larger, ruthless operation. The emotional toll on Keisha's family was heavy. Grief mixed with anger, confusion, and the painful recognition that the city's most powerful figures had preyed upon their daughter and others like her. In the end, Alex's investigation exposed not just a criminal network, but the systemic issues that allowed such exploitation to thrive in the first place. It revealed the deep-rooted corruption within Baltimore's political and law enforcement structures, corruption that had gone unchecked for years. But even as the revelation spread, Alex found herself questioning what she had sacrificed in the name of truth. The line between right and wrong had blurred, and she was left to reflect on the personal cost of her pursuit. Was exposing the truth worth the price she had paid? Could she truly make a difference? Or had she simply unleashed a storm that would never end? The answer remained uncertain, but one thing was clear. The fight for justice was far from over. Alex's journey was one of courage, sacrifice, and the painful realization that, in the end, the truth would always come at a cost.